My name is Margot Hayes and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. The funeral for my husband Ernest was the quietest day of my existence. There beside his grave, I received a message from an unknown number that sent a chill through me. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket, I replied, my hands trembling. Who are you? The response took my breath away. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. That moment tore my soul in two. My world crumbled when I saw Charles and Henry, my own sons, standing by the casket with strangely calm expressions. Something was wrong. Their tears seemed forced, their hugs as cold as ice. For 42 years, Ernest had been my partner, my refuge, my reason for living. I met him when I was 24 in the small town of Spring Creek. We grew up on the same dusty back roads, sharing modest dreams. I cleaned houses to support my sick mother while Ernest repaired bicycles in a small shop he inherited from his father. We were poor, but we were happy. We had something money couldn't buy. Real love. I remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was walking toward the market in my faded green dress and worn-out shoes. He stepped out of his shop with grease-stained hands and smiled at me with a shyness that made me fall in love with him instantly. "Good morning, Margot," he said in a soft voice. "Need me to check out your bike?" I didn't own a bike, but I came up with an excuse just to talk to him. That conversation turned into dates under the big old oak tree in town's square park, then into promises of eternal love, and finally into a simple wedding full of hope. The first few years were hard. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof. When it rained, we'd set out pots all over the house to catch the leaks, but we were happy. Ernest worked from sunup to sundown in his shop, and I sewed clothes for the women in town. When Charles was born, I thought my heart would burst with happiness. He was a beautiful baby with his father's big eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Henry arrived just as perfect. I raised them with all the love in the world, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. Ernest was a wonderful father. He'd take them fishing in the river on Sundays, teach them to fix things with their hands, and tell them stories before bed. I fed them, dressed them, and comforted them when they cried. We were a close family, or so I believed. As they grew up, things started to change. Charles, the oldest, was always ambitious. From a young age, he'd ask why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a car like other families. Henry followed his lead in everything, as he always had. When Charles turned 18, Ernest offered him a job at the shop, but he rejected it with contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." Those words hurt Ernest deeply, though he never said it to me. I'd see him sitting on the porch at night, staring at the stars with a look of sadness. His son had rejected not only his work, but his entire way of life. The years passed, and to my surprise, Charles managed to make a name for himself in the business world. He got a job at a real estate company in the city. Henry followed soon after. They both started making money, far more than Ernest and I had ever seen. First, I was so proud. My sons had achieved what we never could, escaping poverty and building a better life. But little by little, that joy turned into sadness. Visits became less frequent and phone calls grew shorter. When they did come, they arrived in expensive cars, dressed in fancy suits, talking about investments and properties. They'd look at us with a strange mix of pity and shame. "Mom," Charles said to me during one of their sporadic visits, "you and Dad should move somewhere better. This house is falling apart." He was right. But that house held all our memories. It was where we'd raised our sons, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd grown old together. It wasn't fancy, but it was our home. Ernest, always wise, would tell me, "Margot, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I resisted believing it. I kept justifying their absences, their brief calls, their broken promises. They're busy building their lives. I'd tell myself someday they'll be the loving boys we raised again. But in my heart I knew Ernest was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just didn't know to what extent we had become strangers to them. The most drastic change came when Charles married Jasmine Albright, a woman from the city who never hid her disdain for our simple lifestyle. The first time he brought her home, she arrived in high heels that sank into the dirt of our porch, and an elegant red dress that looked more expensive than everything I had ever owned. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced smile. barely extending the tips of her fingers to greet me. Her eyes scanned our humble home with an expression I couldn't decipher, but that made me feel small. During dinner, Jasmine barely touched the food I had prepared with so much love. She moved the meatloaf around on her plate and cut tiny pieces of chicken, but she ate almost nothing. Charles seemed nervous, constantly apologizing for things he had never been ashamed of before. "Next time we'll take them out to a restaurant," he whispered to Jasmine, thinking I couldn't hear, but I heard him. Every word pierced my heart like a knife. Henry, for his part, remained single, but adopted the same distant attitude as his brother. His visits were limited to special occasions, and even then, he always seemed to be in a hurry to leave. He was constantly on his phone, closing deals even during our conversations. "Mom, I have to go," he'd always say before it was time. "I have an important meeting early tomorrow." Family Sundays became a distant memory. Christmases grew cold and formal. My sons would bring expensive gifts we didn't need. They'd stay for 2 or 3 hours and then leave with evident relief. Ernest and I grew old alone, comforting each other. He continued to work in his shop, though his hands no longer had the same strength. I continued with my sewing, but my eyes weren't the same. We made do with our small income, proud not to ask for anything from our successful sons. "Do you know what the saddest part is, Margot?" Ernest said to me one night as we drank coffee on the porch. "It's not that they have money, it's that the money has made them believe we aren't important anymore." He was right as always. My sons hadn't just changed financially, they had changed in their hearts. We were no longer their beloved parents. We were an uncomfortable reminder of a past they wanted to forget. Things got worse when Charles bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood in the city. Henry did the same soon after, investing in a luxury condo that cost $150,000. Suddenly, our sons were owners of fortunes we couldn't even imagine. "You should sell this house and move into a retirement community," Jasmine suggested during one of her rare visits. "There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be more comfortable." The word community hit me like a slap. A retirement community. After 40 years of building our home, after raising these sons with so much love, they wanted to send us to a home. "We don't need a home," Ernest replied with the dignity that always characterized him. "We're fine here in our house." But I saw the expression on Charles and Henry's faces. They supported Jasmine's idea. To them, we were a burden, a problem to be solved in the most convenient way. It was then that the more direct suggestions began. Charles arrived one day with papers in his hand, documents he had prepared without consulting us. "Dad, Mom," he said with that fake smile he had perfected, "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth at most $1,000. If you sell it, I can add some money so you can move somewhere better, a better place." To us, there was no place better than the home where we had been happy for decades. But Charles didn't understand that. For him, everything came down to numbers, to monetary value. Besides, he continued, "I think Dad should retire from the shop. He's already 70 years old. It's time to rest." Ernest looked at him with infinite sadness. "Son, working isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive, what gives meaning to my days." "But you could get hurt," Henry insisted, backing up his brother, as he always did. "At your age, an accident would be very dangerous." Their words sounded caring, but I sensed something more behind them, an impatience, an urgency I couldn't fully grasp. The following months were tense. My sons increased the pressure for us to sell the house. They brought real estate agents without telling us. They had it appraised without our permission. They even began to talk about what would be best for everyone. "Look," Charles said to us during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, "Jasmine and I have decided to have kids soon. We'll need help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could be an early inheritance." "An early inheritance?" He was asking for our inheritance while we were still alive. The audacity of the request left me speechless. Nest remained calm, but I saw his jaw tense. "Son, when your mother and I die, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, our decisions are our own. Don't be stubborn." Henry cut in with a harshness I had never seen from him before. "You're old now. You can't keep living in the past." That night, after they left, Ernest and I stayed up talking until dawn. For the first time in our marriage, We discussed the possibility that our sons were not the people we thought we had raised. "Something's wrong, Margot," my husband said to me with a look of worry I had never seen in his eyes. "This isn't just ambition or impatience. There's something darker behind all this pressure." I had no idea how profoundly correct his words were. I couldn't imagine that my own sons were planning something that would change our lives forever. I didn't know that the tragedy that was coming wouldn't be an accident of fate, but a conspiracy carefully orchestrated by the two people I trusted most in the world. The last normal conversation I had with Charles was 3 weeks before Ernest's death. He came alone without Jasmine and looked more serious than usual. "Mom," he said, sitting at the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast so many times as a boy, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, Henry and I will always take care of you." His words soothed me at the time, but now remembering them beside Ernest's grave, they send a shiver down my spine. Why did he say no matter what happens? What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Ernest had left early for the shop, as he had done every day for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang with an urgency that sent a chill through me. "Mrs. Hayes?" a voice I didn't know asked. "I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words blurred in my mind like ink in water. The world stopped. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to grab the door frame to keep from falling. What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? Is he in the ICU? "Ma'am, please come as soon as possible." The trip to the hospital was a hazy nightmare. My neighbor Doris had to drive me because I was shaking so much I couldn't even hold the keys. The whole way there, my mind refused to process what was happening. Ernest was careful, meticulous in his work. How could this have happened? When we got to the hospital, Charles and Henry were already there. That surprised me because no one had notified them yet. At least not me. But in my desperation, I didn't pay attention to that detail. "Mom," Charles said, hugging me with a force that seemed genuine, "Dad is in bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury." Henry's eyes were red, but something in his expression felt off. He seemed more nervous than sad, like someone waiting for important news rather than someone suffering for his father. "Can we see him?" I asked, desperate. "Only immediate family, one at a time and for 5 minutes max," the nurse explained. When I entered that ICU room, my heart sank. Ernest was hooked up to a dozen machines with bandages covering most of his face and arms. I barely recognized him. His breathing was labored, artificial, kept going by machines that beeped constantly. I walked up to his bed and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed intact. "Ernest, my love, I'm here. Everything is going to be all right. You're going to recover just like you always do." For a moment, I felt a slight squeeze in my hand. His eyes moved behind his closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to get back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room. Charles and Henry took turns accompanying me, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors than in comforting their father. I overheard fragmented conversations that I couldn't fully understand at the time. Henry asked about medical insurance, about the cost of treatment. Charles was on the phone talking about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. "Mom," Charles said to me on the second day, "we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' comp policy that could cover up to $75,000 more." Why was he talking to me about money when Ernest was still fighting for his life? Why was he worried about insurance instead of his father's recovery? "I don't care about the money," I responded harshly. "I just want your dad to get better." "Of course, Mom," he said, but I saw something in his eyes that I didn't like. A coldness, a calculator working while his father lay dying. On the third day, the doctors gave us the most devastating news of my life. Dr. Patterson, an older man with a compassionate expression, gathered us in a small office. "Mrs. Hayes," he began softly, "your husband's condition is critical. The burns have become infected and the head trauma is more severe than we initially thought. We have to be realistic about his chances." "What does that mean?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. It means we need to prepare for the worst. Your husband is in an induced coma. We could keep him alive indefinitely, but his quality of life, well, it's highly unlikely he will ever regain consciousness. My world fell apart around me. 42 years of marriage, an entire life built together. And now they were telling me it was all fading away like smoke. We want to try everything, I said through sobs. No matter the cost, no matter how long it takes. But Charles exchanged a look with Henry that deeply unsettled me. Mom, Charles said in a voice that tried to sound understanding. We have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden on anyone. A burden. I exploded with a fury I didn't know I had. He's your father. He's not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who worked his whole life to give you the best he could. We know, Mom, Henry chimed in. But we also have to think about you. The medical bills are going to be enormous. They could wipe out all your savings. Again, money, always money. My husband was dying and they were calculating costs. That night, alone in the hospital room, I took Ernest's hand and spoke to him as if he could hear me. My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you. It was then that something happened that still gives me goosebumps. His fingers moved slightly, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible. His lips moved as if he were trying to say something, but no sound came out. I called for the nurses, desperate. He's reacting. He's trying to talk. But by the time they arrived, Ernest had returned to his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew what I had felt. Ernest had tried to communicate with me. He had fought to tell me something important. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the machine alarms went off. Lights flashed. Nurses rushed to Ernest's room. I was dozing in the hallway when the noise woke me up. No, 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 I screamed, running toward the room. The doctors worked for 40 minutes trying to resuscitate him, but it was useless. At 4:37 in the morning, Ernest was officially declared dead. The pain I felt in that moment was physical, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. I collapsed by his bed, hugging his still warm body, refusing to accept that he was gone forever. Charles and Henry arrived at the hospital an hour after their father's death. They seemed prepared, as if they had been expecting the call. They brought papers, documents, and phone numbers for funeral homes. We already talked to the Spring Creek Funeral Home, Charles said to me while I was still crying inconsolably. They can pick up the body this morning. We also contacted the insurance, Henry added. The claim process is already underway. How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold just an hour after losing their father? Something was wrong. But my grief was so intense that I couldn't think clearly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Charles took care of all the arrangements without really consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service, as if he wanted to get it all over with as quickly as possible. It's what Dad would have wanted, he said when I complained about not being included in the decisions. Something simple without a fuss. But Ernest deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and forget. The day of the funeral arrived, cloudy and cold, as if the sky itself were crying for Ernest. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn for my mother's funeral years ago. My hands were shaking so much that Doris had to help me button the small buttons on the back. "Be strong, Margot," my dear friend whispered as she carefully combed my hair. "Ernest would want to see you strong, but I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage can't be buried so easily." Every object in the house reminded me of him. His coffee mug on the table, his tools on the porch, his pillow that still held his scent. When we got to the cemetery, I was surprised by how few people had attended. I expected to see more of Ernest's coworkers from the shop, more neighbors, more acquaintances, but it was only Charles, Henry, Jasmine, Doris, me, and the pastor. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same town, who had helped so many people, the funeral seemed strangely empty. "Where are the guys from the shop?" I asked Charles. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he replied quickly. Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. But that wasn't true. Ernest loved his community. He cared about his neighbors. He would have wanted them to come say goodbye. Why had Charles decided to make everything so secretive, so rushed? During the service, I watched my sons with a strange emotional detachment. Charles had a solemn expression appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes constantly darted toward his watch. Henry seemed restless, as if he had more important things to do. Jasmine discreetly checked her phone behind her black veil. This was how they were saying goodbye to their father, with impatience and distractions. The pastor spoke about eternal life, about well-deserved rest, about reuniting with God. His words felt hollow in my shattered heart. I didn't want Ernest to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, for us to keep growing old together, for us to keep drinking coffee on the porch every evening. When it was time to throw dirt on the casket, my legs refused to hold me up. Doris had to support me as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of the dirt hitting the wood was final, conclusive, hopeless. It was at that exact moment, standing by my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart stopped. The letters danced in front of my eyes as if I were hallucinating. I was losing my mind from the grief. With trembling hands, I replied, "Who are you?" The answer came immediately. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone fell from my hands as if it were burning. Doris bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages. Not until I understood what was happening. "Are you okay, Mom?" Charles asked, approaching with a worried expression. I stared at him, trying to find some clue on his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every expression felt suspicious. "I'm fine," I lied, putting the phone in my purse. "I just need to go home." On the way back, I couldn't get those messages out of my head. Was it possible that someone was playing a cruel joke at the worst moment of my life? Or was there really a possibility that Ernest was alive? But if he was alive, who had we buried? And if he wasn't alive, who knew enough details about our lives to write something so specific about our sons? That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a tomb, I reviewed every detail of the last few days. Ernest's accident had been strange from the beginning. According to Charles, a machine had exploded in the shop, but Ernest knew every screw and wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, obsessive about safety. Plus, how had my sons gotten to the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know about the accident before I did? And then there was the money. From day one, Charles and Henry had talked about insurance policies and beneficiaries, as if they had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. I decided to check Ernest's papers. In his old wooden desk, he kept all his important documents in a metal box. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, shop documents, everything was there. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy that Charles had mentioned, but there was something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why had Ernest increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned that change to me, and more importantly, who had suggested he do it? I kept looking and found something even more disturbing. A workers' comp policy that I didn't know about, purchased just 2 months before his death. $5,000 in case of accidental death on the job. $15,000 in total. A fortune for a family like ours, but also a fortune tempting enough for someone without scruples. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. This time I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details that only someone very close to us could know. The next day, I went to the bank where Ernest and I had kept our account for 30 years. Mrs. Thompson, the manager who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere condolences. "Margot, I'm so sorry about Ernest. He was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I came to check our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation." She showed me the bank statements from the last 6 months. What I saw froze me. Over the past 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Money that I didn't know had been moved. Who authorized these withdrawals? I asked, my voice trembling. Your husband came in person, Mrs. Thompson explained. He said he needed the money for repairs at the shop, but I kept the household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and what we spent. Ernest had never mentioned expensive repairs at the shop, and we definitely had never talked about withdrawing thousands of dollars from our savings. Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals? I asked. She showed me the receipts. Indeed, it looked like Ernest's signature. But something about the handwriting seemed off. It was too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. Mrs. Thompson, I asked with my heart pounding, did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him? She thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, I think he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Charles, I think he said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Ernest had trouble reading documents without his glasses. Charles, my son, had been involved in money withdrawals I didn't know about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse, but Ernest saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I looked over the bank receipts again and again, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the evidence piling up in front of me. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Charles's presence in transactions I knew nothing about. His suspicious efficiency in organizing the funeral, his coldness during his father's agony. But the question that terrified me was whether they had really planned Ernest's death, how they had done it, and who was sending me these messages. How did this person know so much about what had happened? The following days became a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every one of Charles's smiles, every one of Henry's hugs, every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before I could accept a truth as horrible as the one taking shape in my mind. My phone kept receiving messages from the mysterious number. Go to Ernest's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. I decided to go to the shop for the first time since the accident. Charles had said a machine had exploded. But when I got there, I found something completely different from what I expected. The shop was strangely clean, too clean to have been the scene of an explosion. There were no burn marks on the walls, no debris, no signs of the destruction that such a serious accident should have caused. Where is the machine that exploded? I asked out loud. I looked all over the shop and found every machine in its place working perfectly. The welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all were intact. What then had been the cause of the accident? In Ernest's desk, I found something that sent a chill through me. A note written in his handwriting dated 3 days before his death. Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Margot. But something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Below that note was another. Henry brought me some papers to sign. He says they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand what it's about. Why all the hurry? My husband had had suspicions. He had intuited the evil intentions of our sons, but he had died before he could tell me. I kept searching and found an envelope sealed with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter from Ernest. My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Charles and Henry. They're too interested in our money, in the insurance, in us selling the house. Jasmine is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more concerned about my safety because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Margot. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. The letter fell from my hands. Ernest had sensed his own death. He had seen the signs that I, blinded by maternal love, had ignored. That night, Charles came to visit me. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that now seemed completely fake. Mom, I've been thinking about your future, he said, pouring himself a glass without asking if I wanted one. The insurance money. It's already in process. It'll be $15,000. How do you know the exact amount? I asked, feigning innocence. Well, I helped Dad with the insurance paperwork. He wanted to make sure you had enough money to live comfortably. A lie. Ernest had never wanted to increase the insurance.